It saddens me to see that in these countries there are supposedly our allies, that they continue to persecute Christians. It angers me to see my tax dollars supporting regimes that put Christians to death for blasphemy against Islam. Countries that put to death Muslims who convert to Christianity, and countries who imprison anyone who marries outside their religion. I say no more money to countries that are doing that to Christians. There's a war on Christianity, not just from the liberal elites here at home, but worldwide. And your government, or more correctly you, are having to pay for it. You're being taxed to send money to countries that are not only intolerant of Christians, but openly hostile. Christians are imprisoned and threatened with death for their beliefs. In Pakistan, Asia Bibi, a Christian, sits on death row. Her crime, according to her, is that she dared to drink from a glass that belonged to a Muslim co-worker. According to the co-workers, they say she insulted the Prophet. In our country, we would refer to this kind of stuff as gossip, and it would get nowhere. In their country, this Christian sits on death row. Recently in Pakistan, a 12-year-old girl with Down syndrome was imprisoned and charged with a death penalty crime for burning the Quran. After weeks, she was released after a local imam was accused of actually sprinkling the pages from an Arabic book into the fire and trying to accuse the little girl. During the Iraq War, over 250,000 Iraqi Christians fled Iraq. Saddam Hussein was a brutal dictator, make no mistake about it, but his government was secular and therefore relatively safe place for Christians. Christians, however, now fear the new government, the new Shiite government, worse than the Hussein government. So the government we put in place has caused Christians by the hundreds of thousands to flee Iraq to go into Syria. So now we have 1 million, 2 million Christians in Syria, and what's going on? We're talking about arming Islamic rebels that are going to be shooting at Christians. It makes no sense to me. Syrians have lived as Christians since the time of Christ. I have a friend of mine who has an Arabic name. He was in my wedding, but he's a Christian. And I asked him when I was in medical school, how long have you been a Christian? He said, well, a heck of a lot longer than you have. He said, we've been Christians since the time of Christ. There have been Christians in the Middle East for a long time. But what we have to figure out is what we're going to do. The Senate's attempting now to arm forces in Syria, many of whom are al-qaeda or their affiliates. They say they're going to vet this, but I don't think it's so easy. They do this out of a misguided attempt to stop the violence in Syria. But I think instead their actions will bring more violence and more persecution of Christians who have long been protected in Syria. Before the Arab Spring, Christianity flourished in small outposts like the Coptic Christians in Egypt. I'd hoped that the Arab Spring would bring freedom to long-oppressed people throughout the Middle East, but I fear that the Arab Spring is becoming an Arab winter. Today, Christians in Iraq, Libya, Egypt, and Syria are on the run, persecuted or under fire, and yet we continue to send aid to the people who are chasing them. While they burn the American flag and the mobs chant death to America, more of your money is sent to these haters of Christianity. Even if all of the atrocities to Christians were not occurring in these countries, we simply don't have the money to engage in this foolishness. We must first borrow the money from China to send it to Pakistan. While American soldiers spent a decade fighting to liberate Iraq, and while American taxpayers have sent nearly $470 million in aid, Carl Mueller, president of Open Doors, describes what is going on there as religicide. Before the toppling of Hussein, Mosul, a city in Iraq, was home to 75,000 Christians, but now the numbers dropped to 25,000. Christian homes are set on fire, bombs are placed in their cars, Christian families are receiving threatening letters to leave Iraq or be kidnapped or killed. It's clear that American taxpayer dollars are being used to enable a war on Christianity in the Middle East, and I believe it must end. Pope John Paul II spoke about a culture of death. He talked about a war of the powerful against the weak. As Christians, we know we must always stand with the most defenseless. I believe that no civilization can long endure that does not respect life from the not yet born to the life's very last breath. Today we have a culture that accepts the wanton disposal of millions of innocent children and sends aid to countries that persecute Christians. I, for one, will not rest until this injustice ends. As Christians, we understand that the right to life, the freedom of religion, pre-exist all government. These rights are not granted to man by other men. These rights are granted to us by our Creator. God help us in these troubling times to make wise decisions, to make moral decisions, and to listen to the voice of God that lives and breathes and resides in us all. Thank you and amen.